Welcome back to the Artificial DM. Today, we're going to take another dive into RPG horror stories. Before we get into the video, I really quickly want to show you this homebrew D&D item that came up on my feed on Twitter the other day.
And another, I'm quite enjoying making these things. Perfect for bards who want to fondle every woman or man, and actually have an excuse to say, sorry, these gloves got minds of their own.
When worn and around women, these gloves love to fondle women. This right here is an item that's an RPG horror story in the making. This one is from the user Solid Gopher. The 4-hour Wookiee rape. Hello everyone. My first time posting here, so I figured that I would start with one of the most frustrating sessions of tabletop RPGs in my life. Some time ago, a friend of mine, we will call him Jim, ran a weekly game of D&D. It was a lot of fun and lasted a couple of years. The game had a massive fluctuation of players, at one point there being about 7 player characters, and others only 3 in the campaign. The fluctuation wasn't an issue, as it was organic, happening over the span of years, and there was always a core group of 4 people: Bones, Spock, the DM, and myself. Spock would have regular issues as a player character, about not wanting to ever have his player character seem like they were less than badass mother flooper. Going so far as even when he got his foot crushed under the heel of a level 20-ish NPC for acting like a jackass, he would say things like, "I walk away like nothing happened." Or if hit with an intimidation roll, he would say that, "It's no big deal to me, I do it anyway." He was very stubborn about it. Whatever. It's no big deal. And honestly, was only mildly irritating. Honestly, as bad player characters in a game, it is the smallest problem to have. That was until Jim, the DM, had Game Master burnout. We've all been there. Run a game every week. You get tired and need a breather, especially with a long-running campaign. He asked if it was okay if he ran his game every other week, and if someone could run a game on the off weeks. This was something we have done a number of times, and was no big deal, and lo and behold, Spock had a game he wanted to run. The game was TSR's Alternity, a neat little generic sci-fi space game they published for about 2 years at the end of the company's life. I do recommend it, the system is really cool. Spock told us to make our space dandies and get ready for our adventure in the stars. I myself rolled up a pilot, Bones made the ship's doctor, and Jim made a captain. Specifically, a Captain Kirk parody of Zap Brannigan from Futurama. His plan was to shoot and floop his way across the galaxy for treasure and glory. Normally you would think that this would be the cringe guy for the story, but you would be wrong. Spock was really into it. We as players were adults, mature, and experienced with romance and adult themes in our tabletop RPGs. The Fade to Black is an easy tool to use, and one we use when appropriate. Seduce the alien? Fade to black. Done, move on. Jim gets a notch in his space belt, and the adventure continues. We are all fans of Star Trek, and would get a cheap, "Haha, Kirk has sex!" laugh out of it, and move on. We wanted to move on. Spock didn't. The reason I talked in length about Spock's player character is that it is important to understand his style as a DM. His stubbornness and inability to accept when he fails bleeds 100% into his NPCs. And there were a lot of them. Within the first couple of sessions, we had amassed 20. That's right, a 20 NPC crew for our ship. Each one of them statted, sheeted, and with full personalities. There were only 3 player characters in this game. Sessions would involve us sitting there and watching Spock have conversations with himself between these NPCs, and they could do no wrong. If you intimidated them, they ignored the intimidation. If you tried to get them off the ship, since we, the players, didn't want them on the ship, they stuck around. If they shot at something, they always hit. If they were attacked, the enemy would always miss. They were all just as stubborn as him. For his one D&D player character, it was fine, but for an entire ship? Awful. And this brings me to the Wookiee. One of the species in Alternity is a blatant ripoff of Wookiees from Star Wars. 8-foot-tall walking carpets that yell a lot. And she, like the other 19 NPCs, were all women because Spock wanted to give Jim options. About the 3rd or 4th session into the game, we were making planetfall on our first real job as space adventurers. to steal from ancient ruins or something. It took a long time to do anything in that game, since we had to wait for Spock's NPCs to shut up and let us roleplay. We had never needed to use the fade to black just yet, since in order for Jim to boldly go where no man has gone before, you have to boldly go somewhere first. Jim had been hitting on all of the NPCs at this point. As a side note, he was not smooth at it. He was intentionally giving Zap levels of crappy pickup lines and bravado. Spock was 100% into it. The Wookiee woman, though, Jim leaned into, since, hey, it's a Wookiee, and that's hilarious, and he made a lot of puns. Once we made planetfall, he talked the Wookiee into his tent. The edges of the camera start to fade to black, and then Spock starts going into detail. A lot of detail. We tell the DM that we're just going to fade to black and move on. Okay, he says, and there is a pause, and we think we are in the clear. And then And that is pretty much how the rest of the night went. The three of us all sitting there while Spock described a pornographic scene between his Wookiee and our captain. Jim, Bones, and I continually telling him, we get it! Let's move on! We forced the roleplay towards the ruins we were supposed to steal from. It didn't matter. He would keep going back to the tent. Let's go! But first we are ready to move on, Spock. Yeah, okay. But she sounds like... And this went on for 4 hours! The details of how that 8-foot-tall fur monolith of a woman had her maxed out strength score away with my ship's captain is still burned into my mind. We kept looking at the clock, watching the time go by as we literally pleaded for him to continue. The only thing that made him stop was the clock hitting the agreed upon, this is when we end game each week. We packed up our dice and silently left with Spock telling us how amazing the session was. The game didn't end there, but Jim no longer wanted to bang his way across the galaxy in fear of another 4 hours of sexual monologue. Bones was starting a romance with one of the NPCs, and he had it run cold in fear of having to sit through Spock describe in detail what was happening in his bunk for an entire session. As for myself, I tried to be sly and told him that my character was gay, and that his menagerie of women held no interest to him. Lo and behold, boys started showing up in later sessions. I told him my player character was a necrophiliac, trying to just cold cock him into dropping it. Things got weird. Oh no. Oh boy. The game didn't last long. It was really just something to do while Jim dealt with the burnout until he could run every week again. The game itself wasn't fun, but the interactions between myself, Jim, and Bones were fantastic, as we had all been in bad games before, and could make anything fun, while Spock sat there and talked to himself. We had brought it up among other friends at a LARP we went to, and ended up finding out that this was pretty common with him. The women at the LARP all knew to never be in a game with Spock, as we were told about the ooze monster that tentacle raped my character, the acid that burned off all my clothes and equipment, and other creepy, cringe, and inappropriate sexual tortures that he subjected any women who would be a player character in one of his games. Others would talk about drow sex cults, and other adventure hooks that were just vehicles for him to force his fantasies onto the other players around him. The horrible thing we realized is that we got off easy with the 4-hour Wookiee rape. It has become a part of our gaming life. Even now, more than 10 years later, when discussing the expectations of a game's themes and limits, we always talk about fading to black, no Wookiee rape. Once the D&D game ended, I was never in a game with Spock again, but stories continued of his efforts to make everyone uncomfortable at a dinner table. TLDR, Captain Kirk-style character seduced Lady Chewbacca into his tent, and the DM told him exactly what happened in the sleeping bag, while the party looked on in horror. So I started laughing while reading that story, and that's because I always just barely skim read before reading to the mic. That way you can have my natural response to it, and oh my gosh, I was expecting it to go even darker. I personally believe that role-playing and having those flirting and other interactions are a part of the game. And the Fade to Black is a perfect use to incorporate, yes, my character is in a relationship, or my character flirted with the barmaid, or my character went and paid for a prostitute, or whatever it may be. But can you imagine just sitting at the table while the DM wants to tell you about his sexual fantasy and urges with your player character? I can't even. I just can't. Anyway, have you ever been through anything super uncomfortable as this? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your stories. Until next time, hope you feel inspired.